The Energy Transition Podcast takes you directly to the cutting edge of the global energy sector's shift, with a specific focus on the critical role played by oil and gas, as well as the pathways developing around a lower carbon future. Your hosts, Leslie Beyer, Energy Workforce and Technology Council CEO, and Dan Pickering, founder of Pickering Energy Partners, are joined by Josh Lowrey, president of Upright Digital. Each episode engages industry thought leaders in an exploration of market-moving trends and topics, including new technologies, ESG, capital markets, inclusion and diversity, workforce innovation, regulatory influences, and the voice of the people. Join us as the Energy Transition Podcast looks at the state of the traditional energy and oil field service sectors, emerging technologies, and the path ahead in a world of lower carbon energy development.
Welcome to the Energy and Transition Podcast. My name is Josh Lowrey. I'm coming to you live from the Flecha Azul Tequila Studio in Houston, Texas. I am joined, as always, with the co-host extraordinaire, Dan Pickering of Pickering Energy Partners. How are you, sir?
I am great, Josh. How are you, man?
I'm doing well. It's been the last time we were together was at Teams Fest, your Teams Fest in Austin, on stage. So we have a little bit of, we're in the studio right now. So it's kind of nice to have no studio audience in front of us. But it's good to see you again.
Likewise.
You been busy?
It has been no shortage of things to do with all that's happening in the world of both energy transition and regular way energy. I know you've been busy.
I have been.
You were in Midland with 4,000 of your closest friends doing an event.
We did. We threw the Daniel Energy Partners barbecue, which was a huge success. I ate a lot of food. The party was so big that if you missed somebody to say hello, that was it.
Yeah.
It was a quick hello, and then they were done for the day.
There was no circle back.
There really just wasn't. You hoped you got 5 or 10 seconds with them, and that was pretty much it. But it was a great success. We had an awesome time, and a lot of your team was out there. So now it's just been a lot of fun. The Teams Fest was awesome. I mean, I've never done a podcast in front of that many people before, so that was enjoyable. Things are going well. And I got your note yesterday that you sent out, and it looks like there's a lot going on in the world to talk about.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we've got the perfect person with us to do that. Maynard Holt, founder and CEO of Veriten. Thank you for joining us, Maynard.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Josh. It's really fun to be with you guys.
I feel like we're in the presence of greatness because Maynard has a very well-established energy podcast called Close of Business Tuesday, but I think you shortened it to COBT.
Well, we kind of go back and forth.
Okay.
Keep them guessing.
Okay.
Occasionally we have one on Thursday, so then it's just the T.
Very wacky. And Maynard, where are you at now in terms of you've got to be in your 100 plus?
I think the number's about 160 over two and a half years or so.
Yeah. So he's making us look like slackers. We do this once a month, maybe twice a month. He does it once a week or more.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, I mean, you had this was something that you looked at and said there's a real value in doing these podcasts. And
yeah.
You focused on this as part of your plan with Veriten, correct?
Yeah, it was, Dan and I are obviously lifelong buddies, at least half a life. And at TPH, there were some really interesting things we could see happening, right? You could see all this technology and the technology ESG collision. You could see people, as we looked at the research menu, you could tell that people were like, well, I don't know if I'm really interested in, another earnings analysis. I'm starting to get interested in technologies. And you could see people wanting the research menu to change. You could see that the method of delivery in the financial world was weighing on people, like another report, another 1-inch thick banking book, so we had kind of experimented with video. So we had all these little trends that we were watching. And then, of course, COVID hits. And you're like, well, gosh, we got to find a way to communicate to all our friends who are stuck at home what we think is happening. And so actually, the funny story is the first time we tried it, it was a Monday. And so Close of Business Monday never got off the ground because after we did, it was the Monday after the Russians and the Saudis had the big kerfluffle, and oil dropped whatever it was, $30 or something on that Monday. It was so depressing. We said, okay, we can't send that out. Let's come back tomorrow. So we came back the next day. Sure enough, the market had bounced a little, so it became Close of Business Tuesday. But then we pretty quickly realized, well, geez, we could use this to interview people, to get smarter, and that's kind of how it got going. And then, honestly, it was fun. And so once a week, you could say, hey, I'm going to take a couple hours and just try to learn something, try to meet somebody new. So luckily, it is pretty fun, and we've been able to stick with it.
Now, I listened to it, and your team gets involved with it as well, right? I mean, you guys...
Yeah, it's Mike Bradley, who longtime kind of market analyst, specialist. He's got a foot in investors and a foot in kind of understanding how companies think, and so he's worked as an investor, so he has a mentality for the markets, so he's great at that. And then Colin Fenton is he was a commodity analyst at JP Morgan and Goldman, so he has a research mentality, but it's very steeped in commodity markets. So when he talks about oil prices or gas prices, he's often talking about the futures market is saying this, and then he's looking at all other kinds of stuff. So we started this. Those guys, besides helping us, everybody, we're all in it together, thinking about what's on the menu and what would be interesting right now. But those guys kind of steep every day in a little bit of market seasoning, so it kind of timestamps anything we're doing. And it's also interesting to see, particularly in the energy transition, some of these, you might have an environmentalist or a politician or a technology person, or, everybody has their walk of life, to see how they perceive some of those market things. Because at some level, all of this is about how the markets are interacting with these strategies and these choices, and so that's always kind of fun. But it's a long way of saying, Josh, yes, we all get involved, and yeah, the three of us have been the main kind of hosts, if you will, for 2.5 years.
I'll give you one more plug on that. Actually, I listened to, I guess the most recent one. Chris Wright was on it, but before the Chris Wright interview, and maybe that's not the most recent, there was a part in there about the London Metal Exchange, and they talked about, I'm a steel guy, so to me that clicked in as a way to look at something that I don't think a lot of people look at, because if you mess up nickel prices, that messes up steel prices, that messes up fluid end prices, which messes up, just the cycle of wherever that ends up. So I commend the research on that as a different way of thinking on the 10 steps to where that's actually going to affect an oilfield service price down the road.
Colin is really good at going and finding like some little nugget somewhere in the system that's telling you some piece of information. Like we went through it a lot with inflation. Like inflation, is it a problem? Is it not a problem? Is it transitory? Remember those days, they're hard to remember now. And he would go find some piece in the system and say, this thing is up 27%. How can there be no inflation? That kind of thing. So he's quite good at that, and it's always kind of
that's a big one though, because steel affects a lot of things.
Yeah,
sure.
So,
well, let's.
Sorry.
Yeah, we're stepping into the story before really kind of framing what the story is. Yeah, exactly. So
that espresso hit me early.
As you mentioned, Maynard, you and I have worked together for a long period of time at Tudor Pickering Holt.
I was your agent at Goldman Sachs.
Exactly.
At Goldman Sachs, I would bump into friends and say, "Hey, have you heard of Dan Pickering?" I have to tell them. I got two answers. I was like, "Have you heard of Dan Pickering in this morning note thing?" And I would get one of two answers. One answer would be some executive would say, "Absolutely, I love it. I read the morning note every morning." The other answer would be, "No, but can you, I don't get his morning note. Can you get me added?" People forget Dan was a cult.
There we go.
Not that you're not a cult now.
Yeah, exactly.
But from 2004 to 2007, there was a Pickering Energy Partners was a cult.
Usually cults end up like in a burning
but a really good cult. Not like a Georgetown, kind of cult.
There we go.
They're really good
they
cult.
end well.
Yes. Enough about me, though. So I'm tired.
Josh, I'm taking over this.
You talk about me for a while. So Maynard, take a step back. tell us a little bit about, give us the Maynard story. Where'd you grow up? How'd you wind up here? And then you've got to help us with Veriten beyond. Sure. It's more than a podcast. So
yeah,
tell us about you. Tell us about your business.
So the me story, I think, is life largely spent below the Mason-Dixon line. So I was born in Knoxville. I trotted that out this weekend as my Alabama friends were texting with me. But yeah, I was born in Knoxville, but I was really raised in Nashville. And this is the old Nashville. This is not the currently hippest place on the planet, Nashville. This was the southern town that happened to have some country music, Nashville. But, it's weird. You can look back and you can see some of the seeds of what Nashville became in the old Nashville, but it wasn't as exciting when I grew up there. And then I finished high school. My parents were divorced, and I moved to Tulsa with my mom and finished high school there, which was a really fun experience. And then from Tulsa, I came to Rice. And the interesting thing about my Rice choice, I remember saying to myself, well, I really like Rice, and Rice is interesting and all that. But I thought, Houston is a great town. Wouldn't it be interesting or wouldn't it be a great idea if while I'm in college, I'm also investing in the town that I might want to live in? And the irony is then I graduated, and I didn't think I really wanted to live in Houston. And then the big punchline in my life after going to grad school and going to Goldman, I'd been at Goldman about 9 years when the team walked in one day and said, we were thinking, Houston, wouldn't that be great? And I said, but I live here.
You were living in New York at the time?
I was living in New York. And what I really remember that was funny is my wife's family, they asked her, they said, oh, boy, I guess Maynard's moving to Houston. Suppose you'll go? I was like, wow. Does your family view these things as optional? Of course you're going.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we moved to Houston, and 2 of the kids were born in New York. The largest baby was born here. Shocker. That's when we bought the Suburban. I was so excited.
The largest baby.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was like a 9-pounder or something,
It better be a boy.
And I remember, the New York hospital maternity area was like, the size of a closet, and the Houston one, I think, had like a walk-in
Everything's
kitchen.
Bigger in Texas.
Everything was amazing. Anyway, and then, the big moment professionally was kind of 06, 07, meeting Dan and having been in Houston and really getting to know the energy business in a different way than you could, I think, in living in New York, because you never got away from it in Houston. It was at the Little League field. It's everybody does it. And so I just started getting a lot of different ideas about how it could be done. Met this guy, realized there was something really special happening at Pickering Energy Partners. And of course, Bobby and I had been friends. So off we went on what was a wonderful professional adventure with Dan and Bobby. So that's a long way of saying, I guess that's me. Personally.
One thing before you go on, a well-known fact inside Maynard Circle, but not that well-known outside Maynard Circle, is that while at Goldman Sachs, he orchestrated at the time the world's largest hug or something like that.
Now I'm going to have to pause and explain this. There's only 9 stories that branch off of this one story. No, it's a funny story because at Goldman, I grew up, Bobby would say the same thing. It was a great place to come of age and had a great culture, and it was just a really neat place. So in, I think it was 99 or 2000, ironically enough, Rob Kaplan would get me involved in this, the former chairman of the Dallas Fed, president of the Dallas Fed. They had an annual conference, like 3,000 bankers. And then they had a problem, which is almost like a closing dinner. Okay, after dinner, we need like some entertainment. So I got tapped for 2 years, like, hey, maybe you seem like you have some personality, maybe. Could you do this for us? And when I was a kid,
Maybe a person.
In the 70s, my brother and I just read, I remember 2 books distinctly from the 70s, the Guinness Book of World Records and the Book of Lists. So I just thought, well, how could we get into the Guinness Book of Records? And sure enough, there was a record for the world's largest hug, which was owned by a Canadian grammar school at about 560 kids or something. I thought, we got 3,000 people at this conference, no problem. So we did it, and if you pick up a copy of the 2001 or 2000 Guinness World Book of Records, it's in there. It says Goldman Sachs Christmas Party, world's largest hug. There's a ton of stories off of this. I'll give you my favorite one.
Okay,
I'll give you my favorite one.
Give this one, Maynard.
So you remember this guy? There was a guy. I won't use his name because I'll probably get it wrong. But there was a guy who quit Goldman. It was like 2000. 13, 14, somewhere in there. And he quit, and he said he's quitting because he was, just upset with the culture. He was frustrated with the culture. It wasn't what it was. And so this guy writes this article, and he says, what is this guy talking about? Culture. Isn't this Wall Street? And then he researched, and he said, but, sure enough, look at this. At one point, they had the world's largest hug. So they start trying to track me down, and I'm getting calls. And that was when I'd grown up a little bit. So I said, I don't really need to talk to XYZ paper about the world's largest hug. But it came back, much as it's coming back here today.
It lives
you
forever.
Can run,
2013,
you can't
2022.
hide. The New Yorker did a story on the hug, which is also quite funny. But there was something in that, which I know we're going to talk about today, which we cared a lot about at TPH, and which I think is a big issue for any company, is just, what's the culture of the place? And why do people laugh at themselves, and why do they communicate in a way that helps the team win, and why do they enjoy going to work, and why do they not take the call from the headhunter? So there's a lot. The hug is a good branching off spot for some cultural conversation.
It sure is. And ironically, probably you wouldn't be able to do that in today's culture, because a hug would be too much invasion of people's personal space.
Well, we did, I wouldn't. We did have a definition of a hug that we put on the screen before in the pre-hug. Yeah. Well, it was important that we fulfill the requirements.
It had been, yes.
The best part is there was a lady from Guinness actually there who could pronounce it the world's. I mean, it's one thing to set the record, but to be,
right.
She gave it to us right there. It's awesome.
Right. Okay, so I think
you didn't even tell me
no idea
what we're learning.
You didn't even tell me you're going to ask.
No,
that is fantastic.
What we're learning, Josh, is we're going to have to be laser pinpointed on our Q&A with Maynard,
because it's going to go on forever.
Or this is a 4-hour podcast, which would be fine.
That's how COBT works.
Yeah, we've only got 90 minutes before you've got to get back to the office.
It's funny.
Great start, though.
Veriten.
Yeah.
So.
That's what we're talking about?
Yeah, we got there eventually. But so what's Veriten do?
Yeah. So I think what we. I obviously is planning for my retirement and Bobby's from TPH, which we, that was a lot of planning and really wanted to do that as well as possible. And I'm excited that I feel like we did. But we had started that podcast there, and I had just said, gosh, guys, I'd kind of like to keep that, be able to, take the small team that's helping with that. And because I guess what I saw in it, because it's not like we charged for it, we still don't charge for it, but I think what I would notice is, particularly in these confusing environmental energy security, it's just gotten more and more complex every day. In that kind of world, to find a really unique person and who has some sort of a visibility on some variable in that broad equation, and to let them talk and then let them share and then just send it out. And then we would, of course, notice that a lot of really interesting people would hit reply and say, hey, that was really cool. Did you know this? And we'd say, no, we did not know that. So it's kind of one of those things where it was like for every guest we found 2 more. And then it just kind of, and we noticed that when people weren't saying responding, people were often saying, "Hey, thanks, I didn't know that." Like quite a lot of times, people will say, this happened the other day. Oil and gas exec said, "I didn't really know the Environmental Defense Fund until you had them on, and then I felt like through that discussion, I got to know them, and then I showed it to the rest of our team, and then we reached out to them." And so there's a lot of those things. So I guess the long and short of it is, I felt like, well, gosh, this creates value. I don't know exactly how to turn it into a business, but I know it creates value. That's the hard part. So we did spun it out, and then we're having a lot of fun with it. It's the exact same format and exploring and all that. What we've tried to do as a business is we've started thinking about investing, and so we have a small fund, and we look at things in this evolving energy world.
Mm-hmm.
And what I find fascinating about it is that you can think a lot about where the world is going, and you can prognosticate, and you can have these gut reactions like, oh, we're definitely going to use more nuclear, or oh, we should definitely stop doing this, or whatever it is. But when you start looking at things as an investor,
it gets real fast.
It gets real fast, and so then it provides some great feedback. It's a nice feedback loop. And so the two things work together quite well. Yeah. I think the thing that we've come up with two taglines at Veriten that have stuck. The first one is, if you would like to save the world, you should start by saving the conversation. And that sounds a little cheeky, but we do have a pretty poor conversation around energy transition, energy security. We have a poor public dialogue around all that, and then when you start playing that through, that leads to poor policy, poor investment decisions, and it has kind of it's gotten us off into a place where my unfortunate observation is that we haven't really helped the climate in the last couple of years. We've certainly,
we being the industry,
the world.
The world, okay.
We have not really made the progress that we wanted to make, and I think it's because we just had a really poor plan, and I think the poor plan came from a poor conversation. So I think that the first tagline we have is we've got to get back to basics and have, like a normal meeting with all the constituents, expressing their views and thinking about trade-offs and trying to solve for a normal way forward. The second one is what is the energy world going to look like in 10 years? And this was another thing that happened there in the last handful of years, being with boards and being with management teams is, 2050 and the pledges and all of those commitments and all that may have a purpose, and it's kind of its own regime in a way, but it's not a planning device. And unfortunately, what it allows you to do is nothing, right? Because you can take the pledge, but then you don't have any.
I'm done. Yeah,
you don't have any homework due this week,
right?
And what's interesting about, for some reason, I always think about college with the 2050 pledge. If they had told me on the first day of college everything's due on the last day, I probably wouldn't have gotten a lot done for the first few years. So. The 10-year thing, what does the world look like in 10 years? We thought that was really interesting because that was the commercial reality we kept bumping into. Mm-hmm. Like that's what a board or an endowment or a long-term investor or a policymaker, you tend to think in that kind of time frame. And so it's a long way of saying, Dan, you asked about Veriten. We sort of see it as you have this media-based think tank type activity, and you couple that with investing, and both sides of the house are asking, what does that look like in 10 years?
Both sides of the house, meaning the media and
the media and the
investors.
And the media part is really, you don't associate media with like deep thinking, not to pick on the media, but what's interesting about the media and the ability to reach a lot of people is that it makes it really easy to find an expert and say, hey, would you talk to us? Mm-hmm. Because there's so many really amazing, smart people around the world, and they what we notice is they're willing to talk to us because it's like, oh, hey, well, you guys reach a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
So as a result of having the media, you get to talk to a lot of people that you would have had a hard time talking
Sure.
to. So you get a lot smarter.
You keep tabs on is your listener count in the gazillions or?
It's like 20,000+. And so, we have a lot of variety. It's funny, about a few months ago, we asked for some feedback from our listeners and friends and such, and just people I should have asked you, but you might have been too tough on me, Dan. We have a lot of variety.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what some people find interesting, they don't consistently, right? Some things just really get you going more than others. There's some that love it all. When people ask who listens, my best description of it is it's the kind of person who would listen to an energy podcast for an hour, which is kind of a unique animal. But it's a long way of saying you do notice some are more popular than others, but we reach a big group. It's largely North America, but it ends up going, I think, at this point to like 65 countries or
Mm-hmm.
something.
That's
We're
great.
trying, we just find that we go an hour. That's the other feedback is like, wow, is it long? And Maynard's too nice. That's the other feedback. But I think
Maynard's too nice, meaning
sometimes
you don't
it's
push
like you
guys.
guys said.
I'm pushing you.
Yeah, but I think what we've noticed is, the problem with this energy stuff, Josh, we were talking about it before, so much of the world is aiming for the gotcha moment that they don't just let people talk. And so usually, even though we go an hour, it's kind of fascinating because you got to get warmed up, you got to talk about the markets, you got to do some niceties, you start getting into the basics, and at about minute 40,
It really gets
something
juicy.
happens.
Yeah.
And it's because someone's comfortable and they feel like, saying something really, interesting. So
What does Veriten stand for? I mean, is the
good.
Latin truth? I mean,
we took veritas and put it with energy. So
Okay, that's what it
it's
sounds.
truth in energy.
okay.
And I think, sorry, I'm talking you guys' ear off about it, but what you'd notice,
I like it.
there's just not a place, since everybody lives in their own little world, and then everybody talks their own book. So the nuclear person says this, the solar person says this, the oil and gas person says this, and it just goes on, and the offshore wind guy says this, and it just, like that. Everybody, of course, talks from their perspective, but there's rarely an opportunity or a forum where someone says, hey, can I just ask you, when you said you were the cheapest alternative, can I just love you? Do you mind just telling me kind of some of your key assumptions? And there just there's really not a good forum for that stuff. I think, honestly, we're just motivated at some level by curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
We're just trying to understand, we're not trying to, there's no gotcha, it's just like, hey, we kind of have a societal global problem here. Can we just kind of, what should be the answer? Like, what should we be doing? And try to put aside the partisanship and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Maynard, I'm stealing from your website a little bit, but I want to read it to frame my next question, which is, your website basically says, Veriten strives to convene the brightest minds in and around energy in a civil, inclusive, and intellectually honest discussion to address the most pressing topics across the space. So that's the lead-in. Very well written.
Thank you. We worked hard on that, Dan.
Yes, that was probably 3 days somewhere.
3 days, 10 people,
Brainstorming
4 consultants.
Yes, exactly.
A couple marketing firms in there.
But that leads to the question, what do you think are the 2 or 3 most pressing things that need to be discussed right now?
It's a great question.
He's so good at this research.
I know. He's on it. Dan and his yellow pad, the guy's a force.
I like your stuff.
I think that the number one thing I think we need to lose as a global society is just the antagonism and negativity towards oil and gas. Like, it's not getting us anywhere. And people, and And maybe it's easy for me to say because, I grew up in professionally around oil and gas and like oil and gas so much. And, but I think that antagonism has shown up in policy, and it has led people to make assumptions which weren't good, to make plans which weren't good, to believe data that wasn't complete. Like, I think that single problem, that issue, the us and them of that issue is the single biggest issue in this whole discussion. Mm-hmm. Like, we got to stop it. We have to stop. I'm never going to get asked to a congressional hearing, but you can't use the product and live and survive off the product and hate the people that give it to you. Like, we've just got to stop that. I think the second one is the there's sort of the mania where we ascribe everything to climate. Like, we can't do that anymore, because I think we're convincing people that like we have to take action and we have to take it now. And the real problem with that is it leads us to say, well, to heck with the national debt. We just got to spend it. To heck with this, that, and the other. We just got to spend it. To heck with the security implication. Like, the mentality that it is urgent and the clock is ticking and we don't have time to slow down and make some of the best choices. I think that's one that we need to lose. I don't know why we have that.
There's a balance, though, because you also said if you were told when you were a college freshman that the exams are on the last day. So, I mean, there's a balance between 2050 and tomorrow, I guess
Great
you're
point.
saying.
This is a great point, which would maybe, you led me to number 3. I don't know if it would have been number 3, but number 3 is, let's have a good, consistent, steady pace of progress. And let's hold ourselves accountable. Let's make progress. Let's say whatever we do, we're going to make progress. We may not get there by this date or that date or the date after, but let's make progress. So that would mean the U.S. government, for instance, needs to say, hey, all this money we're spending, this is what it got us. Or people really, because I think if you take a step back, and you really can't talk too much about cost-benefit analysis seemingly anymore, because we've started thinking that we just have so many resources we don't have to think that way. Mm-hmm. But when you really start getting back to cost-benefit analysis, I think you could solve the problems faster, cheaper. You could do a lot of good, and just for some reason we're not having a holistic, thoughtful, measured, what is everything we need to do. I mean, the thing I'm struck by, we've all worked in organizations. Think about our experience at TPH. If you're going to make a major, massive change in something, the first thing you have to have is buy-in from everybody it's going to affect. Mm-hmm. And neither side, and I mean, there's all kinds of sides to this thing, but no one has slowed down and said, American people, here is the data, here are the issues, here are the choices, these are the trade-offs, here's the plan. So you can't get people to make big changes without really understanding, like, what are we doing, what's the plan? And so I think that's another, I'll wrap up there, is like, I think it's just not being done in a way that we usually do things when we're trying to do something significant.
That is your counterpoint to point number 2, though. What you just described is the negative of point number 2 is sensationalism in the media, and there's nobody there to back it up.
It's not helpful.
It's not helpful.
Well, and here's my other observation that I find really striking. So, we're energy people. Energy people find all this stuff really complicated, and this is what they do. Mm-hmm. So I don't know why I always think of this, but if I'm a dentist in Reno, maybe a dentist in Reno is listening to this discussion. If I'm a dentist in Reno, how the heck would I be supposed to? I mean, instinctively, everybody is pro-environment. Instinctively, everybody wants reasonable cost. Instinctively, people want their power to work. Instinctively, no one wants a war. Like, they have all these obvious basic instincts, but how that gets expressed in the voting booth, and then it goes to politicians, and then it comes back around as policy, like that, it's complicated for us, and we do it. And so that gets back to, I think, this conversation thing, which is we have to find a way to educate people better. We have to have a different process. We have to talk about things in a more measured way.
Maynard, you said we got to make.
God, I sound mature.
Yeah, boy.
Terrible.
Really?
What happened?
Ooh.
This is the hug guy.
You didn't giggle. You didn't giggle one time.
Well, there's one last one. Can I throw this in?
Yes.
This is my favorite example. Can you imagine if in the early 60s Kennedy had said, we have to go to the moon. We have to get there by the end of the decade, because if we don't, we're dead.
There's no place to live.
And, by the way, the aerospace companies don't want you involved. And also, let's solve 10 social issues while we're landing on the moon without the aerospace companies' help. Like, so we have to, again, if I ever have a congressional hearing, the first problem is this oil and gas attitude when we all use it. The second problem is why are we all so negative? Like, why are we all so gloom and doom? Like, why are we all so like, we have to have some optimism. We have to have some can do. We have to have some, hey, we can figure this out. And there's just no, unfortunately, there's I think a lot of leaders to try to get stuff done, and instead of appealing, they appeal to this sense of like, if we don't act,
fear.
They appeal to that fear side. Look, it's all sides involved appeal sometimes to poor instincts. But we got to lose all that. We need the optimism. We need the realism about oil and gas. We need to understand there are other issues. That's what the TV is telling us every day right now. So this thing has just got to get better from a process standpoint.
Very complicated. You said we got to make steady progress. Progress in what? Are we measuring it in temperature? Are we measuring it in dollars spent? Are we measuring?
Yeah.
What are we measuring?
I think you'd do a few things. I think you would. One way you would measure it, and I'm not going in any particular order, but we need to stop having power outages. Mm-hmm. You got to have reliable.
So lack of negatives.
We need to eliminate. We got to have reliable power. That's one. The second one is you've got to get it. You got to get the costs under control, right? And that has everything to do with industry and jobs and people with lesser incomes and national competitiveness. And so you've got to get the costs under control. But I think the third thing is you have to have, I think, a broad-based sense of environmental progress. So, I think sometimes I didn't really appreciate this, but I do believe there are people who, for them, the climate is this singular issue. And I think we should be focused on it, but I don't think you can look past the issues of mining or disposal of certain things, or like you've got to have I think we need a holistic environmental. We consistently strive to make progress, water quality, air quality, etc. I think the last part of this, Dan, and I should have mentioned this in the big picture observation, is sometimes in the U.S. or Western energy transition discussion, I just feel like you can get lost in a sea of the rhetoric, and if you pull back and you talk to developing country people, you just kind of are reminded of the basics in life, which is you do want power, you do need it, you do want a world without pollution, you don't want to be dependent on your neighbor, you do want to grow your economy, and you do have to have energy and income and commerce and stable government you do have to have all that if you're going to attack broadly your environment. And so I think we've got it. We're doing a terrible job of listening to the developing world about all this stuff. I think they're increasingly looking at us like, you guys are kind of being pretty arrogant. I was at a London conference a few weeks ago, and this guy, he's actually coming on COBT next week, but he was an African energy expert, and he said, Europe is turning on every coal plant they can find. And I get it, but I can't get financing for a gas pipeline. So, like, you guys, it's either what is it? What is really? So you can't be just you feel a certain way when it's
Right.
It behooves you to feel that way. So I think we've got to do a better job around, incremental progress is really important, because while we sit here waiting for the magic bullet, the dirtiest coal plant in the world is still out there. You could replace it with a new coal plant, and people could have power. We're so strident in some of these solutions that I think, generally speaking, we should be building stuff that makes things more dependable, makes them as reasonably reasonable expense as possible, and, do make a positive environmental impact. So I'm not telling you anything you guys don't feel every day, but there's a different way to do this, and it starts with leadership. And I don't notice energy is complicated, but I was listening to Biden's speech today, and
The press conference.
yeah, the press
today.
conference. And can you imagine if he had said, I came into office determined to.
Today is the 18th of October. Just
so
timestamp that.
And it's easy to pick on any of these guys, but if he'd said, I came into office really determined.
19th
19th of
Yeah,
October.
19th.
The days run together when
said,
you're doing a cool podcast.
We're having so much fun. But it's like if he had said, I came into office determined to really speed up the energy transition. In my administration, I feel like we did the IRA. We've really tried, and I like what we've done. But it is, I'm going to call a timeout here, because we were going a little fast, and the world has been greatly complicated by this Ukrainian tragedy. And also our relations with the Saudis and the Chinese and a lot of other things are also complicating this. So I've been going really fast, and honestly, I think we need to slow down the program. And we're still going to get there, and I'm really proud of the IRA, but we're going to be doing things which make it easier to do oil and gas, because we need to do those for our security, for costs. And I just streamlined these permits. I just decided I'm waiving this. I've just directed, there's a list of 10 or 15 of those things. And that would be, again, that's kind of maybe a little naive, but I think we need leadership.
Instead, what did he say?
Well, unfortunately, he talked about oil and gas companies, making too much profit, which is one of his solutions is for them to make less, which
Not necessarily make less, but to use it to lower gasoline prices and reinvest.
Yeah.
Specifically gasoline prices.
And then I think he said on the permitting thing, what we need to do is permit the green stuff, but he didn't mention permitting classic stuff. He mentioned the SBR. It wasn't terrible, but I think we all need to ask more of our leaders
let me ask
on
you a
all
question.
sides of the aisle. They need to get better on this stuff.
Your friend Bobby Tudor called it incumbent. You just called it classic. Is that your?
Yeah, I guess I'm probably growing up. I remember. I don't know if it's a classic Coke, new Coke analogy. I don't know what it is, but classic to me just says the one that's here. But
Okay.
classic,
Just
incumbent,
trying
those
to
are good.
Figure the words. He
Yeah.
said incumbent.
Classic equals incumbent.
Yes.
So Maynard, let's go from there's a lot of kind of high level things you talked about there.
Yeah, I went full Kennedy school on you.
That
for a
is
minute.
okay. But now let's go down in the weeds, practical. You're investing money.
Yeah.
So what are the kinds of things you're looking at or interested in or seeing that you think make a difference that you want to put money in?
So the when we go through like a 10-year outlook and try to really think about things that that do all those things. Natural gas, and this is not new news, but natural gas is awesome. And, why the world, I get it. I get it, but I don't get it. The world continues to kind of hand-wring over natural gas. But natural gas is the only, outside of nuclear, it's the only flavor that has done large-scale decarbonization. And so anything branching off of the world using more natural gas, I think is really interesting. Mm-hmm. And that could be everything from emissions monitoring. We've sort of seen a lot of that kind of stuff, but it could be modular LNG. Who knows? I mean, there's a lot of natural gas out in the world. We probably in 10 years aren't putting as much of it on LNG ships. We're finding more of it, on location. But I think natural gas is a great theme. We really like nuclear. It's hard to find something so far to invest in around that theme, but we do really like it and think it'll make a comeback, and think it probably won't be the nuclear that we all think about. It'll be the the smaller stuff. That looks really interesting. Stuff, yeah. The other one that is a really interesting thing, and it was probably one of the best episodes we ever had on COBT, is, in energy, there's always something that comes out of left field that, shakes you up. And because it's like, it just affects a different part of the equation. And so these guys came on from the Salk Institute. Mm-hmm. And so it's sort of they were working hard on plants that they looked at the characteristics of plants that absorb the most CO2. They tried to blend them together, and so they have a plant that really captures more CO2, stores it more in the roots, doesn't give as much up when it dies, etc. And if you look at it, the cost per ton of CO2 looks really reasonable compared to some of these other options. So nature-based stuff, we haven't necessarily found, the magic thing there, but I think nature-based stuff is really interesting. I know. I think for us what Veriten does day to day is sort of shoot the seismic on the world. Like, where are we going? What's going to happen? What's going to change? What are we missing? And then, of course, the fund is there, kind of in case of great opportunity, break glass and grab fund. So I think you need to be careful in this new energy space, honestly, because there's a lot of capital roaming around. A lot of it not necessarily totally focused on making a return. So you can run into pockets of the new world where it's like, wow, there's a lot of capital here, and I'm not sure how much money it is or is not making. So I think you need to be really pretty cautious, because a lot of what we're doing now is exploration spending. Might this work? Yeah, the equivalent of. And so it's a really interesting space. So we're very deliberate about it. But there's just a lot. There's so many factors. I think that's what's funny. Is COBT, we try to limit ourselves to things that could affect energy. So that's only 80% of life. I mean, so there's so many factors that could come into play here.
What?
I'm sorry, Dan, you were looking for a good investment tip, and I didn't.
Yeah, exactly. I was.
You're like, and the company name is, what's their website?
How am I going to be a gazillionaire? Let's shift gears a little bit. You spent a big portion of your career in the upstream oil and gas world.
Yeah.
Give us a snapshot there. Walk us. What's happening? What should happen?
So
consolidation, dividends, cash flows.
I think. Of course, there's all different sizes of those companies, and that'll have a lot to do with their choices. But I think it's a really fascinating thing that over the next 2, 3, 4 years, oil and gas companies, I think, are going to do well, and the space looks like a good space, right, to make money. And the question of what they do with their money is really interesting.
Yep.
And so I think you'll be thinking about the long term, if you're one of those companies, and you'll be asking yourself about your investors always matter, and so what they're telling you will always be a big factor. And I don't expect the dividend and share repurchase and discipline model to go away because it's working, and it's contributing to these companies being really healthy. So, but I do think you'll start to have some interesting choices, right? Like you'll start thinking like, well, we can invest in new technologies. We could have the new division. We could invest in those technologies up to the point of just making us, quote, cleaner, or we could invest in them well beyond that. We could start a new division, and that will be an interesting thing for people to think about. I think is
there any reason that a really profitable mid-sized oil and gas company shouldn't be planting a few little seeds like that? If you're cash flowing $5 billion a year, shouldn't you be spending $100 million of that on seedlings in energy transition? I think you should be. You should have part of the company that's very in tune with everything that's happening and what you might spend money on. I think you do need that radar. And I guess what I would say I probably notice is most companies have that, and they have it in proportion to their size. So the $2 billion company has 3 people, the $10 billion company has 15 or whatever. So I think that is what's happening. It's happening. Okay. I think that's what's happening. I think it's interesting for companies to. It's interesting for them to go out in the world and start making all those connections and to think about having their own venture capital effort, and all that stuff is quite interesting for them.
I'm sorry to cut you. Go ahead.
No, it's structurally how you do it and what's the most effective way and who that group reports to, and hearing from the board hearing from that group. There's a lot of interesting issues in there. I know you guys, Dan, deal with a lot of those groups.
I just feel like that's one of the main purposes of this podcast actually, is to translate these ideas to a traditional classic oil and gas listener that's like, why should I care about energy and transition? What is there? Because these are trusted people that they've known for 20 years kind of in this new segment. I feel like that's part of our role there.
I think you're right.
Maynard, adding on to that, one of the things that's interesting to me is that my perception, tell me if you agree or not, my perception is that those groups within the oil and gas companies, that's where everybody's trying to get to, right? That's where folks are like, I want to stint in new ventures. I want to stint in this business. Should we be scared about that? Or should we embrace it? Or is it inevitable?
You think that people within the big companies are trying to get to that small team?
Want to be in that group?
Yeah.
I think it's to me, that's sort of like a not necessarily.
Okay.
Right? Well, it used to surprise me at TPH. Periodically you'd meet a young person. We had a really talented young analyst who said to me one day, "I like big balance sheets, big cash flows, and fulsome balance sheets. So I like oil and gas and midstream." So I think sometimes it really surprised me, because you do naturally assume that the young and that everybody's kind of going in the direction of the new thing. I think when companies have an interesting goal, and this kind of gets to culture and how people do these things, how you talk about that group internally, and how even if there are only 10 people in that group, you somehow have the whole company involved, and you've kind of stirred up people, and everybody's thinking, and you understand what you're trying to do. I think that's a really fascinating challenge.
The organization.
Yeah, and I notice energy CEOs sometimes, because we'll go, speak at a lunch, or, you kind of just part of some of these gatherings, and for an energy CEO right now, you somehow, classic again, Josh, you got to sort of get everybody really fired up for what you do. Like, forget about what might be doing. You got to get them fired up for what you do, why it's great, why it's awesome, why you should feel proud about it, why at the Thanksgiving table when you're New England relatives give you a hard time why you say no. Let me tell you why you have it wrong on fracking. So you got to fire them up like that, and then you got to say, and by the way, we're not asleep. We're thinking. We got this group, and I want everybody thinking. And if something hits you, so how that because if you do it wrong, those kids are like the teacher's pet.
They're
like teacher's pets, and it's
right.
like then you get that situation. Not to pick on Ford, but it looks like if you work in the ICE division, you just make cash flow and send it to the the electric vehicle
guys.
People, and
Yep.
you imagine they have special jackets and so, but that so somehow it is really fascinating. The other thing I'd say about companies that's really interesting is as you tackle these issues like hydrogen or pick an issue, companies tend to say, well, okay, we need Josh. Josh, you're in charge of hydrogen. Okay, Josh, and you got to do a hydrogen task force, and you kind of do like that, and you want to have a nice, crisp, orderly thing. Well, maybe Josh is not really interested in hydrogen. Maybe Josh is the wrong guy, or maybe Josh, whatever. You kind of want to say, dear company, this is the leadership. We need somebody to study hydrogen. Who out there is really interested? And there's somebody somewhere in a remote part of the company who stays up late at night reading about hydrogen, and you need that person on your task force.
Does someone actually do that, Maynard? Does anyone stay up late reading about hydrogen?
I do. I think if you've seen Reddit, you know that they do.
So anyway, my point is, how you communicate, how you rally people, what you tell them about the importance of their job, why you tell them it's meaningful, how you hook them together with incentives, what you explain the new group is doing, why people can rotate through there, why we're all on the same team. I mean, these are big issues, I think, for companies going through a lot of change. And you're going to have to be willing to make a mistake and be willing to just say, I don't know, and stay really flexible because, can you guys really imagine right now the world's changing 5 times a week? To talk about 10 years from now, you got to be really thoughtful about how you make bets and how you monitor them and the trail you follow, and because you might have to alter course.
That New England Thanksgiving example felt very personal. So I feel like I know he knows exactly what he's talking about on this one.
I'll tell you something funny. So of all these COBTs we've done, it's like 2.5 years, and sometimes the issues are, they're kind of nerdy or thick. We got some great feedback once, which is we did a show on people working on Thanksgiving Day. And so it was one year, I think the Halliburton head of the Permian, zoomed in, and there were 1,000 people working on Thanksgiving Day for Halliburton throughout the Permian, and there was a person who didn't know energy, but who said to us, that was fantastic because I don't know CO2 per barrel. I don't know any of this stuff. I don't know the process by which you make solar panel, et cetera, all this nerdy energy stuff. But I do understand 1,000 people working on Thanksgiving Day, in the field.
Right.
And so
to make sure my house is warm.
Yeah, which I think,
see, right there, that point is the part that that I get the most jazzed up about.
Yeah.
Is I don't think we do a good enough job explaining as an industry what oil and gas does for somebody. The actual benefit behind that molecule of energy.
And I think they, to take it a step further, and then this is probably why we all love energy, because energy people, it is a hard job, but it is an outdoor job. It's a job that involves engineering, capabilities, and so it has all these flavors. But one of the biggest flavors is it has these really great people. Mm-hmm. So when those people kind of get maligned, I think we probably, I want to do my part. But
want to defend them. Yep.
Yeah, we got to defend them.
So Maynard, taking advantage of your wide and varied background, so a BA in Russian, correct?
Correct.
From
Rice. Yep.
A public policy degree from Harvard.
Yes.
So
guilty.
Russian and public policy.
I threw in some econ at Rice just to kind of balance it out.
There we go.
So I could get a job.
Yes. But Give us a take on Russia, Ukraine, and where this thing is going. I set the stage because you actually do think about these things.
At the highest stage.
Yeah.
I guess what I'd say is, like, this one has like really, really worried me from the days when he was putting troops on the border.
Putin.
Yeah, and I think so. I'll just confess that it is hard when your opponent is willing to be. Is not going to play by the same rules that you play by. So that's just worrisome to go up against an opponent like that. I think, to me, what I worry about, besides the humanity of it all, is we need to find a way to win without doing a victory dance that makes it become something really bad. And I think that's something that Putin is very attuned to, and because he's got to find a way to declare
off-ramps.
He's got to find an off-ramp. He's got to declare victory. He's got to. I don't think he thinks of it in the same terms we do. We talk like politicians, like Putin is up for election and he's trying to win a poll. That's not what's happening. I think he would do devastatingly. He would make devastatingly poor choices in his own best interest. So I just worry, how do we get out of this? And then one of the biggest worries I have about that is when you face down an opponent like that who doesn't think the way you do and who doesn't recognize the same boundaries you do, you have to be really unified and really determined, and you got to really stick with it, and you got to be prepared to go through some tough stuff. And so what I worry about with Europe is what they're about to go through from an energy standpoint is really scary. Sometimes you hear things, the Germans are going to, continue the nuclear plants, and, you hear some positive things that are happening. And other times you hear things that make you really worried, like they don't want to sign a long-term gas contract because, da-da-da. Or this field, Groningen, offshore Netherlands, like, as I understand it, that field could really ramp up and add some significant volumes, but we're not doing it because of some seismicity concerns. So it takes a mentality which is stronger than the one we're showing. Even the U.S., which is, yes, it's our battle, or we're helping the Ukrainians, but we should be leading in the same way. I was thinking about the Biden speech. We can't be critical of the Europeans for not turning on Groningen if we're not willing to put some more rigs to work in some place, So we should lead by example. We got to help them. So I'm just worried about the opponent we're facing. I'm, so happy for the Ukrainians that they have fought back and pushed back, and I'm so sad for the Russian people because this is going to set them back 50 years in terms of integrating with the global economy. It's just a really sad thing for them, not to mention all the tragic loss of life. So it's a very unstable situation, and I feel like it should be top of the list every morning to get that situation under control, because the other problem, I think, in all this is that once you have all these unstable situations, you have, now we're kind of fighting with the Saudis in the press. You have the Ukrainian situation. You have the China situation. They're starting to add up. And the probability that you can make it through a year or 18 months or 24 months without something going really wrong, it's getting lower. And so I just feel like as a manager, that's a weird name to call it, the president, as a manager, you have to shut down things that could spiral into things that are really bad. And they could collide with other things. So the world needs more stability and thoughtfulness and less erratic, unpredictable behavior. And so I guess my big worry about it is the nature of the opponent, and does everybody have it as job one to we need to get the world back to normal, because this is not a good situation.
I saw on the news the other day they had the drone attacks in.
Yeah, it's a perfect example.
And I thought to myself, how can this still be happening? Like, they're still trying to kill just pockets of people, and we're 10 months into it, I guess. Like, there's no gain in killing those 10 or 15 people. I just couldn't believe it.
Well, and it just shows, that they're going to practice warfare. He already kind of has a certain approach to things, unfortunately, and now that things aren't going well, it could get worse. So I think one thing I noticed, this is kind of, I'm dating myself, but if you grew up in the 70s, there's a handful of things you knew, even if you were 10 years old in the 70s. You knew the Soviets are bad guys. Insert the word Russians. Bad guys. I mean the government. Nuclear war is a serious, scary, awful thing. You know that whatever you do, you don't want to be dependent on the rest of the world for your energy. So you knew 20 million barrels a day, even as a 10-year-old, because there was this thing called the Iranian hostage crisis. That's another thing you knew, is the Iranians, we really don't need to be debating this. These are not our friends. So, and of course there was an inflation and a stagnant economy, and there was this America is not a wonderful place attitude. And that casserole, if you grew up in that casserole of stuff, like, we got to bag the part about America not being, like, we got to stop it. We got to stop fighting in the huddle. We got to get our act together. This inflation thing, you just got to lean into it hard. A security thing, like, I don't think enough people are looking at Europe and going, ooh, that's bad. We can't be dependent on other people for our energy. We need more of that awakening. We got to, I don't want to scare people, but I mean, you can't be messing around with nuclear kind of, that is existential. Like, that's really scary. And you've just, American economic might is the key to all of this. So deregulating, getting permits getting permits things. You've got to get the world going. So I don't know, the 70s, for those of us who grew up in it, it was a real dose to prepare us for today, because a lot of these things we need to relearn that we learned as kids.
That is the challenge of history, is doomed to repeat it. From Russia, Ukraine, we're going to wrap things up before we go to the lightning round.
So sad I've had such a good time.
I know, there's a lot to talk about.
Before we get there, the Yellow Jeep Company.
Oh, this is funny.
What is the Yellow Jeep Company?
Well,
how do I get a yellow Jeep?
Well, it's my wife says, how many sales? And I say, honey, you're thinking about it the wrong way. Our inventory just continues to go up in value. But the Yellow Jeep Company, when I was a kid, I was really young. My mom comes roaring down the driveway. I had this kind of nutty beauty queen, funny mom. She comes rolling down the driveway in this old, terrible, beat-up red Jeep. And the thing was awesome. 1966 CJ5. We took it like the next day to the Jeep dealership, and she said, just fix it. Fix the whole thing. It's like chitty chitty bang bang. The thing came back in 3 months, yellow, beautiful. And we went for ice cream in this thing. No seat belts. I don't even think we had a back seat. Definitely didn't have a roll bar. But anyway, so this thing was probably like my childhood hero. So ever since, I've liked Jeeps. And then, once you buy one, you buy a couple, and next thing you know, you buy a warehouse. And then the good news is about a warehouse is you can buy more Jeeps. So, but one day we kind of fixed one up. We tinkered with it. And we thought, this could be.
Who is we? You and
me and Jesse.
Okay.
And Jesse and I have worked together for 20 years. So we thought, well, this could be a business. And so, that led us to kind of purchase some more inventory. But then the history of the Yellow Jeep Company is that we decided that's what we'd call it. And our motto is, we're going to make the world a better place by creating more yellow Jeeps. And if that doesn't work, we'll make red ones. And so we got a logo, we got a homepage.
Is this online?
We got a lot of old Jeeps.
The Yellow Jeep Company?
Yellow Jeep Company. We've only sold one, which is
literally only sold one.
Only sold one. But, it takes a while to figure out the craft of fixing these things up. But last spring, my youngest goes to Strake Jesuit. We made a Strake Jesuit Jeep.
Is this the big kid?
He's a big kid. That's the Texan.
Yeah.
And the other kids are like, hey, I'm plenty big. But the Strake Jesuit Jeep, now it was probably under the influence, but it went for $52,000 at the auction. So, I tell Jesse, if anybody asks.
It's like you bought it, right?
No, it wasn't me.
The only one that sold has been at auction for charity.
Yeah. So,
That's a win.
I can feel the Jeep market tightening
starting to happen
every day. But yeah, it's a lot of fun. And so we make yellow Jeeps.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Before we jump into this, I'd love to ask this question here too. The entrepreneur question. Dan has done all the research, as you can see. He's phenomenal. But any suggestions for entrepreneurs thinking about launching a new business? I'm an entrepreneur. I love it. The thought process that went through your head, just because you mentioned, just that one of the values of podcasts is time. Like, not everyone's going to get an hour with you, and I would just love to hear what's your thought process in that.
Well, I've had a lot of fun. This is why I've loved energy. So many energy companies, because you meet so many great entrepreneurs. And so I guess what advice would I have? I guess I would say do it is the first advice. Whatever you're thinking of, do it. What I notice is that when people are doing their own thing, they can do 3 times as much of it as when you're doing something that someone else is asking you to do.
Just the passion pushes you.
So yeah, if you have that passion idea, if you have that thing, I would say do it. It's definitely the first thing. I think the second one is your the people that you do it with are like they just have to share your passion. They don't have to think like you. In fact, it's good if they don't. Bring as many walks of life to it as you can, but make sure they share your passion. And the passion can't be, we're going to make more money than anybody. That's not a passion. Mm-hmm. The passion has to be some sort of goal. It needs to be a ridiculous goal. Like, it can't be like, I'm going to have the 7th best Houston located, whatever. It's got to be something outrageously large, because only with a huge goal can you have real passion. And then with your passion, you can attract other people with passion. And it probably, my gut is it'll work. And even if it doesn't work, this is the great news about passion projects. Even if it doesn't work, there'll be a part of you that says, man, that was fun. I'm so glad I did that. So if your downside is it didn't work, but I had a lot of fun, mm-hmm. and the upside is, oh my gosh, that's a great gamble to take.
Love it. Love it.
Good. Now we're really going to get to the meat of this.
Actually, I got to tell Josh one last punchline.
Do it.
When I was going to join Dan and Bobby, I remember saying to Kathleen,
your wife,
my wife, she doesn't like the story as much as I do. But I said, I don't know. I could stay. I could go. I could stay. I could go. But I think if I work with Dan and Bobby, I think I'm going to have more fun. And she said, and that's relevant because she'll dispute that it was. But I think, having fun, we used to always talk about this at work. I would sometimes ask Dan, like, hey, Dan, are you having fun? He's like, could you not ask me stuff like this? But it really matters, because
a great question.
If people have fun, they don't take the call from the headhunter. They stay a little later. They help a little more. They think a little clearer. Everything goes better. And so fun, which no company will ever stand up and talk about with a straight face, but fun is really a weapon for creating a great culture that does awesome stuff. So that's my plug for fun.
That's good advice.
And Dan Pickering.
There's never a bad plug for fun. Okay, lightning round.
Lightning.
Maynard, the rules here are you only get a one-word answer and no explanation.
I feel like it is that congressional hearing I've been looking forward to.
This is the congressional hearing.
I can't explain my answer, though? Isn't that okay?
Nope. The whole point is it's got to stand on its own, and it'll tell us something about you.
Okay.
So I will start. Rice or Harvard?
Rice.
The Ion or the Warehouse?
The Ion.
Cash or crypto?
Cash. Can I say cash again? Can I say it twice?
U.S. repercussions against Saudi in 2022?
None. I'm praying. Leave it alone. Let's don't fight with our friends.
Okay.
Good one-word answer there.
Rice baseball or the Houston Astros?
Well, I'll go Stros. I mean, we're in their playoffs right now.
Mm-hmm.
Game today. Uber or Lyft?
Lyft. I don't know what it is, but I'm a Lyft person.
Really?
Okay.
Yeah. Maybe it's the logo.
LNG or RNG?
LNG.
S&P 500 for the rest of 2022. Bullish or bearish?
Bearish.
Wind or solar?
Yes.
Okay.
No, wind.
Pizza or sushi?
Sushi.
Seinfeld or The Office?
Yeah.
This is really hard. Seinfeld.
That's a good answer. That's a tough one, though. Will electric vehicle adoption be slowed by lack of battery, metals, or other raw materials?
Yes, sir.
Shawshank Redemption or The Godfather?
I think I'll go Shawshank.
Okay.
This is yours.
This is my question.
Yeah.
I always have
this is my favorite.
I thought you were going to give the results of my my personality test.
Yeah.
And therefore you are.
Therefore, it all comes down to this. Will the Houston Texans make the Super Bowl in the next decade?
Does that mean 10 years, or do I have to make it by 2030? Because I think it's going to be close.
Answer as you wish. Will they make it by 2030?
Yes.
Woo, Maynard, you are in the.
I think it's the second person that said that.
You're in the minority, so we love you.
That's impressive.
You're invited back.
But
you're going to be a recurring
But
guest.
you know what I think? I think that by saying yes, I increase the chances that the Texans will go to the Super Bowl by like 0.001%.
The positivity.
I'm not saying that's why I did it.
Comment. Yeah.
But, just the sheer force of us talking about it will probably make it happen.
I love it. Maynard Holt, founder and CEO of Veriten, thank you very much. We find out more about Veriten at www.veriten.com.
Yes, sir.
Perfect.
Josh requests permission to say one last thing.
Absolutely.
So I got to say something about this guy.
Please.
I don't know when I started doing it, but it was pretty early on. But probably at every TPH town hall, I would refer to Dan as the secret sauce. If you remember, it was special sauce.
Mm-hmm.
If you remember, 2 all beef patties, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickles on a sesame seed bun. Dan was our special sauce. And Pickering Energy Partners, what they did at the time, and I was joking about it before, but it was a cult. It was an amazing thing to say, we're just going to stick stuff in an email. We're going to have some humor on Friday. It was an amazing thing. It made TPH possible, which made much of my life so much fun and so rewarding. So I don't like to be in any public forum with Dan Pickering without saying, thank you, Dan Pickering.
Wow.
That's a great one.
That's very nice.
Bobby
Thank
Tudor
you,
was
Maynard.
here as well. And
did you tear up when he gave a toast to Dan?
it was incredible.
Because I see you tearing up right now.
Well, again, I'm a passion guy.
We're passion guys.
And I like fun. And, it's been great getting to know Dan on this podcast. But I'm also an industry guy who came up in my career in Houston. And I watched TPH grow, and I saw what you guys were doing. And what you did for the industry was great. And it's amazing to kind of see the three of you do that, and then kind of what you're doing now. And the respect that each one of you has for each other now it's really, it's almost a dream career, and yet you're now giving back to the community and giving back to the industry and giving it just continues. So it is. I'm not tearing up, but it is special to watch, and I appreciate it.
Well,
so
you're very nice.
Thanks for your time on here.
You're very nice.
Thanks. Josh, that was fun. Maynard, that was fun.
Yeah.
Thank you to you both. A lot of fun.
Thanks. If you look us up on all our social media channels. Any questions, give us a shout on uprightdigital.com. Thank you very much.
Great.